If you were en route to Alaska, what would you be looking to get? What does an acceptable deal look like?
He is not meeting with a friend. He is meeting with an adversary, and an adversary who wants to see the destruction of the United States.
This woman should be in jail. Literally, Hillary Clinton should be behind bars. And so should the people who worked for her who did this. This is so blatantly corrupt.
You know that moment when a conversation suddenly goes quiet and everyone pretends it's totally normal? This is that on live television. Megyn Kelly presses, the room tightens, and Hillary Clinton is left staring into the abyss of a very uncomfortable question. No chaos, no shouting, just tension so loud it echoes. The pause alone is legendary, but the reactions afterward? Even better.
There she puts out this tweet, and it's a picture of her, a much younger Hillary, and the caption on the hat reads, "But her emails." And she writes in her tweet, "Bringing this back in light of recent news. Get a limited edition But Her Emails hat and support Onward Together groups working to strengthen our democracy." The nerve of this woman to have committed federal.
Before we move on, smash that like button and subscribe because you don't want to miss out on this one. Megyn Kelly enters the public conversation like a perfectly sharpened pencil placed next to a stack of unfinished homework that Hillary Clinton has been resubmitting for years with new covers and the same unanswered questions inside.
She wanted to distract from her email scandal. She cooked up a plan to accuse Trump of being a Russian agent in order to distract from her own legitimate scandal. She made up a scandal about Trump being a Russian asset. And they banked on the intel agencies working with her to perpetuate this lie, and it appears they were only too happy.
There is no dramatic entrance or ceremonial buildup because none is needed. The contrast alone does all the work, and Megyn Kelly's presence instantly reframes the narrative from one of rehearsed authority to one of overdue accountability.
Put out this mug. We'll put it on the screen. You can see it here on my notes. Have you seen this?
I haven't seen it. I see a little
it's
one
a mug
on your
that's
notes.
got like an outline of her, and she's sipping a coffee, and it reads, "Turns out she was right about everything."
My God.
She tweeted it out, writing, or on Insta, "We recently had some new merch made based on a phrase I hear a lot. The design happened to be finalized today." This is the day of.
At this point, Hillary Clinton's long-standing confidence built on titles and tenure suddenly looks less like strength and more like insulation that has finally been peeled back. Megyn Kelly dismantles the myth piece by piece by refusing to treat Hillary Clinton's reputation as a substitute for clarity because prestige does not magically convert ambiguity into truth.
Aaron Mate explained she had this CrowdStrike group that suggested it was the Russians who had hacked the DNC. They took that hook, line, and sinker, and so on. So this shit's crazy. What she did, I don't even have the words. She's still walking around, acting like she won and he stole this election and it was the one back in 2016 and that it was not legitimate.
Every carefully maintained aura surrounding Hillary Clinton begins to wobble as Megyn Kelly applies pressure with logic instead of volume, which is far more unsettling for someone accustomed to controlling the room through gravitas alone. The effect is subtle but relentless, like gravity slowly reminding an object that floating forever was never part of the deal. Hillary Clinton's political brand has long thrived on sounding authoritative while remaining strategically imprecise, which works beautifully until someone refuses to applaud the performance. Megyn Kelly does exactly that by highlighting how Hillary Clinton's statements often circle an issue like a satellite that never quite lands, offering plenty of motion but very little substance.
Hillary Clinton, of course, is the original election denier. I'm sure you voted for her in 2016.
Well, she's not an election denier.
She absolutely was the OG election denier.
First of all, she came out before the sun had risen to concede the election to Trump.
And then spent the next 4 years saying he was illegitimate. He was an illegitimate president. Trump has
she
done.
came out that night
She
in her
conceded the
dark
election.
purple suit and conceded the election.
Correct. And then
Something
spent the next 4 years trying to convince us it was not legitimate.
Megyn Kelly's greatest weapon in this one-sided dismantling is her refusal to play the emotional card because she understands that facts do not need sympathy to stand upright. Hillary Clinton's habit of reframing criticism as unfair treatment loses its effectiveness when Megyn Kelly calmly demonstrates that scrutiny is not persecution, but a basic expectation. This shift forces Hillary Clinton's usual defenses to short-circuit because victimhood does not pair well with a resume that spans decades of power and influence. As Megyn Kelly continues her methodical tear down, Hillary Clinton's legacy begins to resemble an over-decorated storefront with impressive signage but questionable inventory. Every claim of competence is quietly weighed against outcomes that never quite match the promise, and Megyn Kelly lets the imbalance speak for itself without adding unnecessary commentary. The humor emerges naturally from the contrast because watching someone defend complexity while avoiding clarity is inherently absurd when presented under a bright, unflinching light.
Stole his first term as president. These absolute liars who run around trying to act like they're the protectors of democracy completely ruined it, tried to undermine it at every turn and at the highest levels with lies, with out and out lies that were really serious, and changed foreign policy and changed the course of history in this country in Trump's presidency. And there must be accountability. There has to be actual criminal accountability for those who lied.
By breaking down these explanations into plain logic, Megyn Kelly turns what once seemed sophisticated into something oddly hollow, like a luxury handbag filled with crumpled pamphlets. Hillary Clinton's reliance on institutional language suddenly feels less like expertise and more like camouflage that has finally been spotted. The destruction becomes unmistakable when Megyn Kelly highlights how Hillary Clinton's career has been built on surviving controversies rather than resolving them because endurance is not the same as vindication. Hillary Clinton's defenders often point to longevity as proof of success, yet Megyn Kelly reframes it as a remarkable ability to outlast consequences without ever fully addressing them. This reframing lands with devastating precision because it invites the audience to reconsider whether survival should be confused with accountability. Megyn Kelly's approach strips away the emotional cushioning that often protects Hillary Clinton from direct evaluation, leaving behind a record that must stand on its own merits. Without the usual reverence, Hillary Clinton's statements sound less like leadership and more like rehearsed reassurance offered by someone hoping the audience will stop asking follow-up questions. The comedy lies in how serious these statements are delivered despite their increasingly fragile foundation. As the critique deepens, Hillary Clinton's tendency to lean on historical firsts and symbolic milestones begins to feel like an attempt to distract from unresolved realities.
Clearly violated the law with that homebrew server that had been accessed by foreign agents. She compromised national intelligence information. She did things she would never have allowed anybody at the State Department to do under her. And that leaves me back to Schellenberger here. This is page 4 of his report. He writes as follows: the Russian reports, again, that the Dutch spied on, that we got our hands on, also claimed, and listen to this. I mean, you probably already know this stuff, Glenn.
This balance prevents Hillary Clinton from retreating into legacy talking points, which forces her public image to confront the present rather than hide behind the past. Megyn Kelly's dismantling reaches another level when she underscores how Hillary Clinton often frames her decisions as inevitable products of circumstance, as though personal agency took a long vacation whenever outcomes turned inconvenient. By emphasizing choice and consequence, Megyn Kelly restores agency to the narrative, which removes Hillary Clinton's favorite escape hatch. The humor sharpens here because watching inevitability collapse under basic reasoning is like seeing a magician's assistant quietly reveal the trap door. Hillary Clinton's reputation for strategic brilliance begins to look overstated when Megyn Kelly points out how frequently strategies required retroactive explanations. Plans that were once sold as calculated moves now resemble improvisations justified after the fact, and Megyn Kelly's calm delivery makes this realization land harder than any accusation ever could. The audience is left to wonder how many confident declarations were actually polished apologies in disguise. Megyn Kelly also exposes the paradox of Hillary Clinton's public persona, which demands trust while resisting transparency, creating a tension that cannot survive sustained examination. Trust, after all, thrives on clarity, not complexity deployed as a smokescreen. By repeatedly emphasizing straightforward reasoning, Megyn Kelly turns Hillary Clinton's elaborate narratives into punchlines without ever needing to raise an eyebrow. The destruction feels complete when Megyn Kelly reframes Hillary Clinton's composure as a practiced response rather than a genuine reflection of confidence, because poise loses its power once it is recognized as performance. Hillary Clinton's measured tone, once admired as professionalism, begins to sound like a script being read for the 100th time with diminishing conviction. Megyn Kelly's refusal to be impressed by tone alone forces substance to carry the weight, and substance struggles to keep up.
This is the most loyal and loneliest goalkeeper in history. Christmas Day, 1937, Charlton versus Chelsea. A fog so thick you couldn't see your own feet. 60 minutes in, the ref blows the whistle to abandon the game. Everyone leaves the pitch, except one man. Sam Bartram stood there for 30 minutes in total silence. He thought his team was just dominating the other side. Finally, a policeman emerged from the fog. He stared at Sam and said, "What on earth are you doing?" The game was called off.
Meanwhile, Megyn Kelly's critique cleverly avoids personal attacks, which makes the outcome even more devastating because it denies Hillary Clinton the opportunity to claim unfair treatment. Instead, the focus remains firmly on patterns, decisions, and outcomes, all of which are presented with the kind of dry wit that trusts the audience to connect the dots. The humor is intellectual rather than theatrical, making it far more memorable and far more damaging. As the analysis continues, Hillary Clinton's long-standing habit of framing criticism as misunderstanding begins to unravel because Megyn Kelly demonstrates that understanding is not the issue. The issue is coherence, consistency, and accountability, none of which can be waved away with appeals to experience alone. The irony is thick enough to cut because the very experience meant to inspire confidence instead highlights how often lessons appear to have gone unlearned. Megyn Kelly's takedown also highlights how Hillary Clinton's messaging often assumes goodwill without earning it, relying on the audience's patience rather than their agreement. By challenging this assumption, Megyn Kelly forces Hillary Clinton's words to compete in an arena where authority does not grant immunity. The result is a public image that looks increasingly outdated, like software that has not been updated but insists it still runs perfectly.
People, remember, Obama's president, Loretta Lynch is his attorney general, and her DOJ/FBI are investigating the Hillary Clinton email scandal. And also now we learn simultaneously working with the Hillary Clinton campaign to bury that scandal in favor of calling Trump a Russian agent. Okay, so the Russian reports also claim that Attorney General Loretta Lynch had privately told a Clinton campaign official.
And the final blow comes not from a dramatic revelation, but from cumulative clarity, as Megyn Kelly allows the weight of repeated inconsistencies to settle naturally. Hillary Clinton's attempts to maintain control over the narrative begin to feel like rearranging furniture in a house with a cracked foundation. Megyn Kelly never needs to announce victory because the contrast speaks loudly enough on its own. By the end, Hillary Clinton's carefully constructed persona appears less like a fortress and more like a museum exhibit that has not aged as gracefully as advertised. Megyn Kelly's destruction lies in her ability to treat Hillary Clinton not as an untouchable figure, but as a public servant subject to ordinary evaluation. This normalization strips away the mystique and leaves behind a record that must finally answer for itself. What makes the entire dismantling so hilariously effective is that Megyn Kelly never appears rushed or emotional because she understands that patience is the sharpest blade of all. Hillary Clinton's long reliance on controlled messaging cannot survive in an environment where every statement is examined rather than admired. The audience is left not with outrage, but with clarity, which is infinitely more unsettling. Megyn Kelly's one-way roast succeeds because it replaces reverence with reason and symbolism with substance, exposing how easily authority can masquerade as credibility when left unchallenged. Hillary Clinton's legacy, once buoyed by titles and tenure, suddenly feels heavier under the weight of unanswered questions.
Hillary Clinton decided to drop an op-ed in the New York Times today that's entitled, "How Much Dumber Will This Get?" And she uses Signalgate and the messaging by Pete Hegseth and Mike Walls and JD Vance and Tulsi and others on there as the jumping off point to talk about how dumb the Trump administration is. Some highlights. She calls the Trump administration hypocritical, dangerous, and dumb over this story.
The laughter comes not from cruelty, but from recognition, because nothing is funnier than watching confidence evaporate when it finally meets accountability. Megyn Kelly does not need to shout or celebrate because the destruction is complete in its quiet efficiency. Hillary Clinton's image, polished over decades, now bears the unmistakable marks of scrutiny that no amount of experience can erase. The entire episode stands as a reminder that power thrives on deference, but it crumbles under examination, especially when that examination is delivered with intelligence, wit, and an unwavering commitment to clarity. That clarity continues to sting because Megyn Kelly's approach quietly rewrites the rules that Hillary Clinton has relied on for decades, replacing deference with evaluation and admiration with arithmetic. Once the numbers are added up, the equations stop working in Hillary Clinton's favor because intention does not cancel outcome and complexity does not absolve responsibility. The humor sharpens as the realization settles that what once passed as sophistication now looks like an elaborate way of saying very little with great confidence. Megyn Kelly's persistence exposes how Hillary Clinton's public reasoning often leans heavily on the idea that good intentions should be graded more generously than results, which might work in a memoir but collapses under real scrutiny.
Talking about Russia briefly, you and I have talked before about how Hillary Clinton labeled you a puppet of Putin, a Russian asset. Debbie Wasserman Schultz shamefully said the same. And I saw recently President Trump withdrew Hillary Clinton's security clearance, which you had to do.
Yes.
I mean, that must have been a little fun. Right? Oh, just a little fun.
I smiled.
Of course you did. You're only human.
Yeah.
By refusing to separate effort from impact, Megyn Kelly forces a reckoning that Hillary Clinton's narrative has long postponed. Watching this unfold feels like witnessing a long-running series finally confront continuity errors that viewers noticed seasons ago, but were told to ignore. The irony deepens when Megyn Kelly highlights how Hillary Clinton's messaging constantly emphasizes intelligence and preparation, yet so many explanations arrive only after consequences have already taken their toll. Preparation, when paired with perpetual surprise, begins to resemble overconfidence rather than foresight. Megyn Kelly does not need to say this outright because the contradiction becomes obvious once placed under a steady, unblinking spotlight. Hillary Clinton's reliance on moral certainty also begins to wobble as Megyn Kelly reframes certainty as something that must be demonstrated rather than declared. Confidence without corroboration starts to feel like branding rather than belief, and branding loses its power when the audience starts asking for evidence instead of slogans.
Not the hypocrisy that bothers me, it's the stupidity. We're all shocked that President Trump and his team don't actually care about protecting classified information or federal record retention laws. I mean, this is so rich given her history. What's much worse is that top Trump administration officials put our troops in jeopardy by sharing military plans on a commercial messaging app and unwittingly invited a journalist into the chat. That's dangerous. And it's just dumb.
Megyn Kelly further dismantles the illusion by underscoring how Hillary Clinton's authority has often depended on being treated as inevitable rather than accountable. When inevitability is challenged, it quickly reveals itself as a fragile construct held together by repetition rather than truth. Hillary Clinton's image, once framed as unstoppable, suddenly appears oddly dependent on everyone else agreeing not to look too closely. The takedown becomes even more effective as Megyn Kelly exposes how Hillary Clinton's explanations frequently rely on collective blame, as though responsibility dissolved the moment more than one person was involved. By recentering leadership as the willingness to own outcomes regardless of context, Megyn Kelly strips away a favorite layer of insulation. The result is both devastating and darkly amusing because watching responsibilities scatter under pressure is like seeing a carefully stacked house of cards collapse in slow motion.
Outdone former President Bill Clinton. He tweets out, "Where did the time go? There have sure been a lot of happy Valentine's Days. Here's to one more."
Wait, what?
What's he got planned afterward? I really like Trump's, actually. I think Trump's is better than both Bill and Hillary's. I think it's right up there with Shakespeare's sonnet 118. Maybe that's the same one that I'll send to my wife, sweet little Elisa, tonight. You know, "Dear honey, even with all of the haters and the losers coming after me, you know, you've stood by."
When Megyn Kelly calmly aligns actions with rhetoric, the gap becomes impossible to ignore, and Hillary Clinton's once commanding posture starts to resemble someone defending a thesis they no longer fully recognize. The humor intensifies as Megyn Kelly reveals how often Hillary Clinton's defenders mistake longevity for wisdom, as though surviving controversy automatically transforms it into virtue. Survival, when examined closely, looks less heroic and more procedural, especially when lessons appear optional rather than essential. Megyn Kelly's refusal to romanticize endurance turns what was once praised as resilience into an open question about growth. As the pressure builds, Hillary Clinton's polished calm begins to feel increasingly disconnected from the substance beneath it, like a perfectly ironed suit worn to explain a series of inconvenient truths. Megyn Kelly's steady dismantling makes it clear that composure without coherence is just aesthetics doing overtime. The laughter here is subtle but relentless, because nothing deflates gravitas faster than realizing it has been operating on reputation alone.
Okay, I raised Chelsea Clinton because her mother, Hilary, for some reason, thought it would be moving, a good idea, a good PR move for her to on camera read the acceptance speech she was going to give in 2016, the night she never was able to let down the balloons and the fireworks. And it's part of a masterclass, I guess, educational video on the topic of resilience.
By presenting patterns instead of accusations, Megyn Kelly allows the audience to reach conclusions independently, which makes them far harder to dismiss. Hillary Clinton's usual escape routes, paved with appeals to experience and intention, quietly close one by one. By the time the dust settles, Hillary Clinton's public image feels less like a towering historical figure and more like an overextended brand overdue for an audit. What once carried the weight of inevitability now reads as accumulation. Decades of messaging, positioning, and moral framing layered so thickly that the structure beneath begins to blur. Megyn Kelly does not celebrate or editorialize because she does not need to. The contrast alone does the work. One side leans on legacy, reputation, and the assumption of credibility. The other relies on little more than pointed questions and a refusal to be impressed. What remains afterward is not outrage, but realization that power sustained by narrative alone cannot survive sustained examination. Eventually, it collapses under the simplest question of all. Not what it has been, not what it claims to represent, but whether it still deserves to be believed.